Today is Thursday, November 15th, and I'm going to give you some of my favorite DraftKings picks for tonight's 9-game slate. Let's dive in. Joe Holka here. Welcome to another daily fantasy sports and betting video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a profitable DraftKings player and get better at betting, start now by subscribing to the channel, clicking that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. If you want to take that a step further, check out the description below. The links to the live streams over on Twitch and the links to the Discord will be down there. Definitely want you guys to get involved with the community that we're growing here. You won't regret it. All right, guys, a lot to get to today. 9 games. The Thursday slates are always fun just because the contests are a little bit bigger on DraftKings. I'm primarily a tournament player, as you guys know. So I am going to touch on some of my favorite stacks today, as well as go through the slate per usual, position by position. So the first thing that stands out to me is probably the same thing that's standing out to a lot of people. It's the San Jose Sharks team against Toronto at home. So you don't need me to tell you how good San Jose has been this year offensively. They do have the highest Corsi 4 on the entire slate. And Toronto, again, like pretty common theme, just one of those teams that's been giving up so much defensively as far as shots. They haven't given up a ton of goals lately, so that is notable. So I think that that's somewhat interesting. If you wanted to play the other side of this game, there's definitely going to be some Toronto options that will go extremely low owned. Not sure I'll go there personally, but it's something I'm thinking about from an ownership perspective. Really like the Detroit Red Wings today, guys. It's not a team that we're normally on. If we just look at their Corsi 4, they're one of the lowest shot volume teams on the slate, but the matchup is good enough to I bet there's going to be some value on the Detroit side of things. If we just look at Corsi against, both these teams in the top 5 on the slate. So I would expect it actually to be a relatively high-paced game. I think it's kind of interesting. We'll have to see what Vegas thinks, but Detroit also has the 3rd highest matchup rating on the slate, which is super interesting. The highest matchup rating on the slate does belong to Tampa Bay against these Pittsburgh Penguins. They are on the road, but another team that has been elite offensively lately. So 3.53 goals per game over the past month for Tampa Bay. It is a really good spot, actually, against this Pittsburgh team who's been giving up a ton of shots, not necessarily goals, but I think that Tampa Bay is one of those teams that can definitely break through. Only Ottawa has given up more Corsi against over the past month than Pittsburgh. So definitely a decent spot for all of these teams at the top. These matchups are the ones that stand out to me. Really like Detroit, really like Tampa Bay, and really like San Jose. Pretty simple slate for me so far, at least on this page. Let's see if we uncovered anything for Vegas. All right, so a couple of teams at the top that we didn't mention on the page, the Corsi page before. So that's great. So we can kind of look down and we see that San Jose, just outside the top tier, I guess, still is really close for their implied total. Pittsburgh as well in this high-paced game. But Tampa Bay and Detroit kind of down here a little bit further past that top tier. And what this tells me is that it could be a really nice tournament slate, especially if you're high on Tampa Bay, high on the Detroit Red Wings. Both these teams are on the road, so that could be partially due to what their implied totals are at right now. But Detroit's actually an underdog in this game. If we're just looking at the largest favorite, we do have the Minnesota Wild against the Vancouver Canucks. Let's jump back over the team ratings quickly and see what it looks like for the Wild. All right, so in order to see where the Wild are on the Corsi 4 expectation, we have to scroll almost to the bottom. And it's interesting that both of these teams are at the bottom of the Corsi 4. So I don't expect this to be a high-paced game. Yeah, there might be some goals, but efficiency is not something I'm usually attacking in NHL. So I think Minnesota sets up as an interesting tournament fate, especially if they end up being a decently high-owned team in tournaments. Kind of middle-of-the-pack matchup rating. If we just look at Corsi against, yeah, I mean, Vancouver, Minnesota, like relatively good defensive teams, at least over the past month, that not allowing shots. I guess where this comes from is that Vancouver has the 4th highest goals against over the past month. So Vancouver giving up a decent amount of goals. But again, guys, an efficiency spot for Minnesota, not one that I'm super interested for cash games. Maybe there'll be some pieces that stand out to me. But yeah, I'm not super on this game, especially if it's going to be high owned. All right, one more game I do want to check out over on the team ratings page is Philadelphia versus the New Jersey Devils at home. Another 3.4 implied total, so let's see what they think over on the team ratings page. All right, so Philly is at least middle of the pack in Corsi 4. If we look at their goals for expectation, they do have the 2nd highest expectation on the slate. A little bit of a better matchup, in my opinion, against this New Jersey team. This is one that we were targeting earlier in the week. They've been giving up a decent amount of Corsi, I would say above average, but they've been giving up a lot of goals, 2nd most goals on the slate. So this one makes a lot more sense to me than the Minnesota play on the Philly side of things. So let's not put off the positions any further. Let's jump in. All right, guys, looking at this page now, you won't be surprised that I'm thinking about going back to Steven Stamkos at 6,800. I think that still a guy that has been getting the volume from shots. And what I'll talk about a lot, if you're new here, is in DFS hockey, I'm really looking for shots, looking for block shots. So from centerman, if you're going to be paying up for someone today, I think that he's in a really nice price point at 6,800, 95th percentile in shots. But again, 96th percentile in power play shots. So I think that those power play shots are really high equity shots. So if we just look at their first power play unit, it's basically him and Kucherov that have been taking the majority of the shots. So I definitely think that both of those guys together makes a ton of sense. Again, it was a stack that we were on earlier this week. Didn't quite work out because they didn't score, but anytime you can get correlation on the power play and at even strength, definitely think that it's at least interesting. So on the Minnesota side of things, I mentioned I'm not really interested in stacking the entire game. One guy that I am interested in is Eric Staal at 5,800. So if I was to play a potential one-off play, he's a guy that has been shooting the puck a ton. He also blocks shots, which is very valuable as far as floor is concerned. So at his price point, 5,800, 95th percentile in shots, 90th in shots plus blocks, I think that Staal is my favorite play in this game outside of maybe one of the defensemen who we'll get to. But if we just look at their power play unit, honestly, I'm not super interested in stacking up these power plays because of what we talked about in the game flow concerns from before. But yeah, I think Derek Stepan is interesting at 4,500 specifically. So he's a guy that we had earlier in the year for a lot of volume, but his price kind of creeped up to that 5,200 range, and I was a little bit uncomfortable with that just because I wasn't normally stacking up the Coyotes. But on the other side of this game today, it's not a great matchup, but 4,500 for a guy that is in the 97th percentile in Corsi. So it hasn't really translated quite yet, but I think Stepan's at least interesting at 4,800. I think there's some better value options at the other positions, but definitely wanted to touch on him. All right, guys, this won't be surprising to many of you that watch my videos, but Evander Kane at 6K, he's the winger that I really want to get to today in this matchup against Toronto. I mentioned how much I like San Jose. So, I mean, once Evander Kane starts getting on the score sheet a little bit more, he does have 2 goals in his last 4 games, so he's kind of turned it on a little bit, but the shots have remained constant. Like, he's a guy that is going to continue to shoot, 97th percentile in shots, 97th in shots plus blocks. So you do have a little bit of block equity there, and that's actually something that is not as common at winger as it is at the center position. So definitely like the fact that Kane is willing to put his body in front of pucks. At 6K, still looks like a decent price point for him. If we're just looking kind of at this power play unit, another guy you can go to kind of in this range is Timo Meier at 6,500. He's a guy that has been scoring a ton, not over the past couple games, but his shot volume is just as secure almost as Evander Kane's. So I think that if you wanted to kind of go with one of these guys and build around them, makes a ton of sense. Same kind of thing, 99th percentile in shots plus blocks, 97th in shots over the past month. So pretty similar volume shooters. You do get them together on this second unit. So if you wanted to fade Pavelski, Couture, maybe Brent Burns, and kind of go with another side of this kind of game flow, and maybe get Carlson in there too in stacks, definitely like that side of things. But both of these guys, I think, have really strong floors. All right, it wouldn't be a winger breakdown without touching on some of these New Jersey Devils. Like Taylor Hall, 7,600. Seems like a pretty tough price point, but I think he's probably worth it, guys. So obviously he went off in the last game. Was really happy that he was pretty much a focal point of my video on that day. But yeah, definitely think that he is one of the top plays on the slate from a volume kind of consideration concern. 96th percentile shots, 99th in shots plus blocks. Really similar to kind of the Kane range, but I think you'll get these Devils at a little bit lower ownership. He's a guy that has as much upside as far as his shots than anyone in the league. You compare him with Kyle Palmieri. The upside with Palmieri is that his shot volume is down in kind of comparison to some of these other guys we're talking about, but a lot of his shots are coming on the power play. So he's always a guy that's a threat to score a goal, and definitely think that his power play shots, 94th percentile over the past month, is something that I'm definitely interested in. You can put both of these guys together, and then definitely like the idea of kind of throwing out some New Jersey Devils stacks, especially if Philadelphia is super popular. I did mention these Philadelphia Flyers. Definitely like quite a few of the kind of usual options we would have on this first power play unit. Definitely think that they're squarely in play for stacks like Shane Gostisbehere quite a bit. But while we're on the winger position, kind of like Konecny a little bit. Travis Konecny, 84th percentile in shots. Doesn't really blow the doors off, but 95th percentile in Corsi over the past month. So he's had a lot of upside. Hasn't really gotten there yet, but at 4,200, he's still at a price point that I think is super reasonable. At even strength, he is still not kind of where you want him to be as far as correlation, but he does get kind of a little bit of access to Giroux and Couturier, at least at even strength. So I kind of like the idea of going to Konecny at 4,200. He's probably my favorite value play at the winger position for sure. So let's just move over to defense now. The good news is we don't have to go too far. I think Ivan Provorov is one of the top defense options on the slate. At 4,500, he's my favorite value for sure. He's a 94th percentile in shots plus blocks, 91st in Corsi. If I'm paying down, really like the idea of going to some of these Philly guys today. If we just look at some of the defensemen that are priced up a little bit more, definitely a ton of options today. So I'll start with one of the guys that you'll hear me talk about a decent amount over in Nashville, and that's Roman Josi. 6,100, still a decent price point from a guy with this kind of floor. 99th percentile in shots plus blocks, 98th in shots, but again, 97th in power play shots. So you get a lot of equity with Josi just because of how much he's used on the power play. If we look at this power play unit, he is kind of by a large margin over the past month at least being featured on the power play. So definitely like Josi. If we are paying up today. Love Brent Burns. Don't really need to talk about him a ton, but another 99th percentile guy in Corsi. So really think that if you're stacking up that first unit, he's kind of a must. And at 6,600, kind of a cash game staple for me on pretty much any slate. But one of the guys that I thought we should probably touch on is Chris Letang. It's not a great matchup, obviously, but I mentioned how much I do like Crosby Malkin in tournaments. I think rolling him with Letang at 6,200 makes a decent amount of sense. These guys are super expensive, so it's still kind of a pay up to be contrarian spot. It's not really a great spot against Tampa Bay, of course, but I do think that his shot volume is great, 98th percentile in both Corsi and shots over the past month. One guy that I do really want to touch on, though, as one of my favorite plays probably on the entire slate, I mentioned how I liked Eric Stahl for Minnesota. I definitely like Matt Dumba as well. 5,700. This guy's price never really seems to rise enough for me because he shoots a ton. He's always a threat to score. Logs a ton of minutes, guys, and that's like super important at the defense position. So Matt Dumba, 97th percentile in shots, 98th in power play shots. I think at 5,700, he's a guy I'm building around in cash games for sure, and not afraid to go to him as more of a one-off play in tournaments. So I think Stahl and Dumba, probably my two favorite plays in this Minnesota game, and that's pretty much going to do it, guys. Let's move over to tiers. Yeah, so before we get into this, guys, I know you guys love the tiers. I did want to mention as I was filming this, Sidney Crosby looks to not be playing today on Thursday, so definitely if you're using the lines page over at Labs, definitely be checking the news as things happen, definitely. So it looks like Sidney Crosby's day-to-day, so this first tier looks a little bit more thin than it did before. I definitely think going to these Toronto guys in tournaments, they're going to be extremely low owned. Tough matchup against San Jose. Taylor Hall for me is the clear-cut option in tier 1 today. We're going to kind of fly through this a little bit. This video is still getting a little bit longer than I prefer. So at tier 2, this is actually kind of a tough tier for me today, actually. I think that Shabbat is interesting. So he's a guy that has been really strong in the Corsi numbers. He does eat a decent amount of time on the power play as well. Super talented kid if you watch this guy. He's willing to shoot the puck. So definitely think he's interesting. I never thought we'd see him this early in tier 2. I think he's an interesting play from tournament perspective. Timo Meier, probably the guy that I'm going to in this tier. Mentioned how he has shot volume similar to Vander Kane. I don't think you can really go wrong with Meier, but I do think Mitch Marner in tournaments, especially if you end up rolling out some Tavares stacks, makes a lot of sense, but tournament only for me against San Jose. Tier 3, this is a tougher tier for sure. I think Philip Forsberg, you can always make an argument for this guy. The Coyotes don't give up a ton of shots is the problem, but Forsberg is definitely the guy that stands out to me as a volume shooter in this tier. I definitely think that if you wanted to go to Sean Monahan, if you wanted to kind of stack up the Calgary side of things, that's one team that we didn't talk about a ton, but I do think that they're in a relatively decent spot tonight as well. Tier 4, for me, as I get to some of these lower tiers, it's going to be more about correlation for me. So I think Giroux, if I end up stacking up Philly, is the guy I'll go to in this tier. In cash games, I still think it's Mika Zibanejad. New York Rangers aren't a team that we're normally attacking a ton in stacks, but he's like the perfect one-off play because he can still hit value with his shots in each and every slate. We've seen him in Tier 2 and Tier 3 quite a bit, so seeing him all the way down in Tier 4, definitely interested in that against the Islanders. In Tier 5, again, Brent Burns, probably him and Yossi are the ones that I'll be deciding between in cash games tonight. I think that they're both super safe. Yandel is more of a guy that is seeing most of his production come on the power play, so you kind of need to stack him with some of these Florida guys. Same with Phil Kessel. He'll probably be only in Pittsburgh stacks for me, but without Crosby, maybe there's a chance that Phil Kessel gets a few more shot opportunities, but not a great matchup against Tampa Bay, as we talked about. Pedersen all the way down to Tier 5. He's been in Tier 1 a bunch lately, which I didn't really understand. Not really rolling him out. Not a high-volume shooter. Maybe a great real-life player. Definitely an up-and-coming star in this league, but not someone I'm super excited about for fantasy. Definitely in the higher tiers. It's more interesting in Tier 5. But yeah, still probably on Burns and Yossi. Tier 6 is a little bit tougher for me because we have Steven Stamkos, Crystal Tang, Kyle Palmieri, Genny Malkin. A lot of these guys. I wish that these guys were a little bit more spread out. Seth Jones as well, another guy that's a really high shots plus blocks guy. So this is probably the tier that I will hedge the most. I think that you can kind of get access to your guys in stacks. If I had to pick one guy for cash games, I still think that Stamkos is in a phenomenal spot tonight, especially this Pittsburgh team without Crosby defensively. I think Stamkos has a chance to have a big game. But really like the floor that you get from some of these other guys like Seth Jones and Crystal Tang as well. So this is a really tough tier for me. I'm probably just going to hedge with pretty similar expectations in my tournament lineups. Tier 7, Evander Kane. That's probably all I have to really say about this, guys. I definitely think that there's a few of these guys that will be in my stacks. I'll have Pavelski with my San Jose stacks. If I end up rolling out Florida, Barkov will definitely be a part of those. But this one's pretty easy for me, guys. I still think Evander Kane underpriced in fantasy across the board, and that includes tiers. Tier 8, yeah, so I mentioned Stepan before. Another guy for the Coyotes that is interesting to me, at least in these tiers for upside, is Galchenyuk. Tough matchup against Nashville. Johansson, always a threat to kind of rack up assists, but not a high-volume shooter. Josh Bailey, some of these other guys, Anders Lee. I think Anders Lee's interesting because we at least know he's going to shoot the puck. I'm interested in Huberdeau, especially if you roll him with your Barkov stacks. But this is a tough tier as well, guys. These back two tiers are pretty tough. I think that the best thing you can do is kind of go with a floor option here in cash, and then kind of pair these guys together with these other tiers in your stacks for tournament. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this 9-game slate. Thursday is always a fun day. Definitely keep an eye on news as things are trickling out. If you like my work and you want to support my work, you can do so by subscribing to the channel. And then definitely hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see anything different going forward in these. And let me know if I missed anything, guys. I'm definitely open to suggestions. We've had a couple people pop in on the comments and talk about some kind of other value plays that are popping up as news comes out. One of the guys we were on the other day in the comments was Chilwowski from Detroit. So I definitely think that he's interesting again tonight, but it just always kind of caught my eye that one of the viewers decided to throw that in the comments. So I love that, guys. Get involved. Another way you can get involved is to check out the Twitch streams. I'll have another one tonight, specifically NFL driven after Thursday Night Football. And then as well, check out the Bankroll Challenge video that just went up today. That was a live stream from last night. So a ton of exciting stuff. Check out the Discord. We'll definitely be talking more NHL as we get closer to lock. But good luck, guys. All right, good talk. See you out there.